An impossible encounter with humans. So there I was, minding my own business, thinking about a routine diplomatic mission to the human colony of Beta Prime. Yeah, they named it after some old Earth thing, because humans have all the creativity of a broken translation matrix when it comes to naming things. I'm Xyler of the Fifth Perception, by the way, which roughly translates to, he who questions the wisdom of taking this job, in Standard Galactic. Fitting, really. The whole thing started because someone in the Confederation Council thought it would be brilliant to send me, a mid-level bureaucrat with the social skills of a malfunctioning food processor, to negotiate a mining rights agreement with the humans. Apparently, my species' natural ability to detect resources through our biological sensors made me the obvious choice. Right. Because nothing could possibly go wrong when you send someone who's never been within 3 parsecs of human space to deal with the most unpredictable species in the known galaxy. I should have known things were going sideways the moment I stepped off the transport shuttle. The human who greeted me, some person named Lieutenant Commander Valeri, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. Her smile had that particular quality that screamed, "I'm being paid to pretend I'm happy to see you. Welcome to Beta Prime, Ambassador Xyler," she said, butchering my name in a way that would make my ancestors weep. "We've prepared quarters for you in the diplomatic sector." The diplomatic sector, as it turned out, was a converted storage facility that smelled like industrial lubricant and disappointment. But hey, at least they remembered to install atmosphere controls. Progress, right? The first few days went about as well as you'd expect. The humans were polite enough, but there was this underlying tension I couldn't quite pinpoint. Every time I mentioned the resource survey data, they'd exchange these looks, you know, the kind that say, "We know something you don't, and you're not going to like it." It wasn't until day 4 that everything went to hell in a thoroughly human fashion. I was reviewing geological reports in my quarters when the emergency klaxon started blaring. Now, I've been around long enough to know that when humans start their warning systems, you should probably pay attention. These are the same beings who once declared war on their own planet's weather patterns and somehow won. Valeri burst through my door without bothering to knock, because why would humans respect basic diplomatic protocol? Her face had gone that particular shade of pale that humans get when they're about to deliver bad news. "We've got a problem," she said, which in human parlance means we're all probably going to die horribly. "What kind of problem?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. "The kind with massive armed raiders, superior firepower, and a really bad attitude toward non-humans," she replied, confirming my suspicions. "The Diktat Hegemony found us." "Ah, the Diktat Hegemony. Lovely bunch. If your idea of lovely includes systematic genocide, aggressive expansionism, and a fashion sense that somehow made military uniforms look even more intimidating. They'd been carving a path through the Outer Rim territories for the better part of a decade, and apparently, they'd finally decided that Beta Prime looked like a nice place to add to their collection. How long until they arrive?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. 6 hours, maybe 7 if we're lucky. Valeri ran a hand through her hair in that distinctly human gesture of frustration. "Look, Ambassador, going to be straight with you. We've got maybe 3,000 colonists here, and our defensive capabilities are, well, let's just say they're optimized for mining operations, not repelling invasion forces." This was it. This was how I was going to die. Not in some glorious diplomatic triumph, but as collateral damage in a backwater colony that most of the galaxy had probably never heard of. I could already see the memorial inscription, "Here lies Xyler, who died because someone thought it would be fun to send him to negotiate with humans." But then something strange happened. Instead of panic, instead of the chaos I expected, the humans did something that still makes my cranial sensors ache when I think about it. They got organized. Not the kind of organized you see in military dramas with lots of shouting and dramatic music. No, this was the quiet, methodical kind of organized that humans do when they've decided that reality is being unreasonable and needs to be corrected. Within an hour, every civilian had been moved to reinforced shelters. The mining equipment had been repurposed into defensive positions. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Lieutenant Commander Valeri had apparently decided that keeping me alive was her personal mission. "You're coming with me," she said, appearing at my door again with a look that brooked no argument. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, though I was already following her down the corridor. "Say what you want about humans, but when they get that determined look in their eyes, you don't argue. You just hang on and hope you survive whatever insane plan they've cooked up." "Command center," she replied. "If we're going down fighting. And you might be able to help." The command center turned out to be a converted conference room with more jury-rigged equipment than a salvage yard. But the humans had made it work. Because, of course, they had. Humans have this annoying habit of making things work, regardless of whether they should theoretically be able to. The situation reports weren't encouraging. The Diktat fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and enough fighter craft to blot out the local stars. Beta Prime's defenses consisted of 6 mining platforms with improvised weapons, a handful of atmospheric fighters, and approximately 3,000 very determined humans. In any reasonable universe, this would be called a massacre waiting to happen. But then, Captain Kellen, Valeri's superior, and apparently the kind of human who eats impossible odds for breakfast, did something that redefined my understanding of the word audacious. "All right, everyone," she called to the room. "We're not going to win this with conventional tactics. Hell, we're not going to win this with unconventional tactics, either. So, we're going to have to get creative." What followed was the most insane military briefing I'd ever witnessed. The humans laid out a plan that involved using the colony's industrial fabricators to create improvised weapons, turning the asteroid mining charges into proximity mines. And this is the part that made my species equivalent of blood pressure spike, using me as bait. "The resource sensors in your cranial structure," Kellen explained. "They can detect metallic composition at range, right?" I nodded, wondering where this was going, and already suspecting I wouldn't like it. "Good. Because we're going to need someone who can identify the weakest structural points on those Diktat ships. Real-time targeting data for our improvised weapons. You want me to sit in a combat zone and perform geological surveys on enemy warships?" I asked, just to make sure I was understanding the scope of their insanity correctly. "Pretty much," Valeri said with a grin that was probably meant to be reassuring, but mostly just looked manic. "Don't worry, we'll keep you safe." Right. Because humans have such a stellar track record when it comes to keeping things safe. But here's the thing about humans. And this is something most of the galaxy doesn't really understand. They don't just ask you to risk your life for them. They risk theirs for you first. Over the next 4 hours, I watched 3,000 colonists work with the kind of focused determination that most species reserve for religious experiences. They weren't soldiers, most of them. They were miners, engineers, farmers, shopkeepers, regular people who'd signed up for a quiet life on the frontier, and suddenly found themselves preparing to fight one of the most ruthless military forces in known space. And every single one of them went out of their way to make sure I was okay. The engineer who rigged my scanner interface to the targeting computer spent an extra hour making sure the neural feedback wouldn't cause me discomfort. The medic who checked my life support systems did a full health scan and offered me something for anxiety. Apparently, humans have drugs for everything, including existential dread in the face of overwhelming odds. Hell, even the guy manning the mess hall brought me something to eat that was actually compatible with my species' dietary requirements. It tasted like cardboard mixed with synthetic nutrients, but the thought was there. By the time the Diktat fleet dropped out of hyperspace, I'd made a decision that probably violated about 17 different diplomatic protocols. I was going to help these insane, impossible, wonderful humans fight. The battle began exactly as you'd expect a battle between 3,000 colonists and a professional invasion fleet to begin, with the humans getting their collective asses kicked. The Diktat's opening salvo took out 2 of the mining platforms and half the atmospheric fighters. Their ground forces landed in 3 waves, establishing beachheads on the colony's perimeter with the kind of clinical precision that spoke to centuries of practice at this sort of thing. From the command center, I watched the tactical displays with a growing sense of doom. The humans were fighting bravely, but bravery didn't stop plasma cannons or deflect orbital bombardment. "All right, Ambassador," Kellen said, her voice steady, despite the fact that her colony was being scientifically destroyed around her. "Time to earn your keep. We need targeting data on that lead cruiser." I activated my scanners and focused on the massive Diktat warship hanging in orbit like a metallic monument to aggressive foreign policy. What I found made my cranial sensors practically vibrate with excitement. "Captain," I said, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice, "that ship has a structural weakness. The Diktat builds their vessels with redundant armor plating, but the mounting points for the heavy weapons create stress fractures in the hull. Can you pinpoint the exact locations? Give me 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds felt like 30 years. But when I finished my scan, I had something that made Kellen's eyes light up with predatory satisfaction. "Perfect," she said, keying her comm system. "All units, this is an order. We have targeting data for a precision strike on the flagship. Coordinates incoming." What happened next was the kind of thing that makes humans simultaneously the most terrifying and most admirable species in the galaxy. Instead of trying to penetrate the cruiser's armor with their improvised weapons, they used the mining charges they'd converted into mines to create a debris field around the ship. Then they used the precise targeting data provided to hit the stress points with coordinated strikes from every remaining platform. The result was, well, let's just say that watching a kilometer-long warship tear itself apart from structural failure is the kind of sight that stays with you. But the humans weren't done. Oh no, they were just getting started. While the Diktat fleet was dealing with the sudden loss of their flagship, the colonists launched phase 2 of their plan. They'd been using the colony's industrial fabricators to create what they called surprise packages. Basically, anything that could explode, emit radiation, or otherwise cause problems for heavily armored space marines. The ground battle turned into the kind of chaotic chaos that humans seem to thrive in. The Diktat forces, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves dealing with mining equipment used as improvised tanks. Construction robots were programmed for combat, and humans who apparently thought that tactical retreat was just a suggestion. I spent the next 6 hours providing targeting data for increasingly creative applications of mining technology. Who knew that asteroid boring equipment could be so effective against powered armor? But the moment that really stuck with me, the moment that made me understand something fundamental about humans, came during the final phase of the battle. The Diktat had managed to break through the perimeter defenses and was making a push toward the command center. Their shock troops were advancing through the industrial sector, and it looked like the colonists' desperate defense was finally about to crumble. That's when Lieutenant Commander Valeri did something that still makes my species' equivalent of hair stand on end. She grabbed a plasma cutter from the mining equipment and charged directly at a squad of Diktat heavy infantry. Not tactically, not as part of some clever plan. She just decided that these particular aliens were not going to hurt the people she was responsible for protecting, and did something about it. The fact that she survived the encounter had less to do with tactical brilliance, and more to do with the Diktat troops being so shocked by her complete disregard for self-preservation that they hesitated just long enough for the rest of her squad to flank them. But that wasn't even the crazy part. The crazy part was what she said to me afterward, when the medics were patching up her numerous plasma burns and everyone was trying to figure out if we'd actually won or just delayed the inevitable. "Thanks for the help with the targeting data," she said, like I'd done her some minor favor instead of potentially saving her entire colony. "We couldn't have pulled this off without you." That's when it hit me. These humans hadn't asked me to help them fight for their lives as some kind of diplomatic obligation. They truly wanted my assistance, and they were grateful for it, in the same way they'd be grateful if I'd helped them move furniture or fix a broken piece of equipment. They treat acts of mutual survival as casually as most species treat small talk. The battle ended when the remaining Diktat ships, faced with the loss of their flagship and the complete disaster that their ground invasion had become, decided that Beta Prime wasn't worth the cost and withdrew to lick their wounds elsewhere. The humans, being humans, immediately started organizing relief efforts and damage assessments, while simultaneously planning a celebration for their unlikely victory. I should have left then. My diplomatic mission was obviously a write-off, and there were forms to file and reports to submit back at Confederation headquarters, but something made me stick around for a few more days. Maybe it was curiosity about how humans deal with post-battle cleanup. Maybe it was professional interest in their improvised defensive technologies. Or maybe it was the fact that Lieutenant Commander Valeri had saved my life at least 3 times during the fighting, and I wanted to make sure she survived her injuries. What I discovered during those extra days changed my entire perspective on humanity's place in the galactic community. The humans didn't just rebuild their colony, they improved it. They took the lessons learned from the Diktat attack and redesigned their defenses, their infrastructure, even their civilian evacuation procedures. Within a week, Beta Prime was not just back to normal, it was better than it had been before the attack. But more than that, they remembered everything. Every person who'd contributed to the defense, every act of courage or creativity or simple, stubborn refusal to give up. They kept track of it all, and they made sure everyone got recognized for their part in the victory, including me. Captain Kellen called me into her temporary office on my last day at the colony. The original command center had been destroyed during the final Diktat push, so she was working out of a converted storage shed that smelled like lubricant and determination. "Ambassador," she said, "I wanted to thank you personally for everything you did during the attack. Your targeting data made the difference between victory and massacre." I started to give the standard diplomatic response about interspecies cooperation and mutual benefit, but she held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not talking about the official stuff," she said. "I'm talking about the fact that you chose to stay and fight with us when you could have evacuated. That meant something to my people." She handed me a small device that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts, which, knowing humans, it probably had been. "What is this?" I asked. "Emergency beacon," she replied. "Keyed to Beta Prime's communication array. If you're ever in trouble, anywhere in the galaxy, anytime, you activate that beacon and will come running." I looked at the device, then at Kellen, then back at the device. "Captain, I appreciate the gesture, but surely you realize that the chances of me needing emergency assistance from a frontier mining colony are..." "Doesn't matter," she interrupted. "You stood with us when the chips were down. That makes you family. And humans don't abandon family." Family. She called me family. I've been in diplomatic service for most of my adult life. I've negotiated trade agreements, mediated territorial disputes, and sat through more ceremonial dinners than I care to remember. But no one had ever called me family. I took the beacon. 3 months later, I was on a routine inspection tour of Confederation research facilities when everything went sideways again. Because apparently, the universe has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor involves putting me in mortal danger at regular intervals. The research station I was visiting, Kepler Station, orbiting a gas giant in the Vega system, was attacked by pirates. Not the romantic, swashbuckling kind of pirates you see in entertainment halls, but the kind that view civilian casualties as acceptable collateral damage in their pursuit of whatever they can steal. The station's defenses were minimal. It was a research facility, not a military installation. The security forces were overwhelmed within minutes, and the pirates began systematically looting the place while taking hostages to ensure compliance. I found myself locked in a storage compartment with a dozen other survivors, listening to the sounds of the station being torn apart around us. The pirates were being thorough, and it was only a matter of time before they found our hiding spot. That's when I remembered the beacon. I pulled the device out of my diplomatic pouch and stared at it. Kellen's words echoed in my memory. "If you're ever in trouble, anywhere in the galaxy, anytime, you activate that beacon and we'll come running." But Kepler Station was 14 parsecs from Beta Prime. Even if the humans received the signal immediately, it would take days for any kind of rescue force to reach us. The pirates would be long gone, probably with us as hostages to be sold on some outer rim slave market. Still, what choice did I have? I activated the beacon. The response came faster than I'd expected. Not a rescue force, but a voice transmission on a secure channel that somehow bypassed the pirates' jamming. Ambassador Zyler, this is an order from Beta Prime. We've received your distress signal. Hang tight. Help is on the way. Help was on the way. 14 parsecs away, and help was on the way. I started to ask how they could possibly mount a rescue operation across that distance. But the transmission cut out before I could form the question. What happened next is the kind of thing that makes perfect sense if you understand humans, and absolutely no sense if you don't. The pirates had just finished looting the station's main laboratory when every communication channel on Kepler station simultaneously activated with the same message. Attention pirate vessels. This is the Terran Colonial Defense Network. You are currently holding Ambassador Zyler of the Confederation, who is under the protection of Beta Prime Colony. You have 10 minutes to release all hostages and withdraw from the system. The pirate captain, a particularly unpleasant Regalian named something I couldn't pronounce, responded with the kind of profanity-laced tirade you'd expect from someone whose day job involves robbing research stations. 10 minutes, the transmission repeated. After that, we stopped being polite. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The pirates had done their homework before attacking Kepler Station. They knew it was lightly defended. They knew the response time for Confederation security forces, and they knew there were no military installations within rapid deployment range. What they didn't know was that humans have a very flexible definition of rapid deployment range. At the 9-minute mark, 3 objects dropped out of hyperspace near the gas giant. They weren't ships exactly, more like heavily armed cargo containers with engines strapped to them. The kind of things you'd build if you needed to get from point A to point B quickly and didn't particularly care about aesthetics or crew comfort. The lead container broadcast a message to the pirate ships. This is Strike Package Alpha, Beta Prime Colonial Defense. You now have 1 minute to comply with previous demands. The pirate captain made the mistake of treating this like a negotiation. Big mistake. Strike Package Alpha turned out to be 3 of Beta Prime's mining ships, hastily converted into what humans apparently call armed merchant cruisers. They'd stripped out the mining equipment, installed military-grade weapon systems, and somehow managed to make the 14 parsec jump in less than 4 hours. The technical specifications of how they managed that journey are classified, but I suspect it involves the kind of creative engineering that humans are famous for, and that makes safety inspectors wake up in cold sweats. The pirates, faced with 3 ships that shouldn't have been able to exist, let alone function, made their second mistake of the day. They decided to fight. What followed was less a space battle, and more a practical demonstration of why you should never underestimate human creativity when it comes to violence. The converted mining ships used their original equipment, now repurposed as weapons, to systematically dismantle the pirate vessels. Industrial cutting lasers, it turns out, are quite effective against starship hulls when applied with sufficient enthusiasm. The boarding action was even more educational. The human marines who came aboard Kepler Station weren't professional soldiers. They were the same miners, engineers, and colonists who'd fought off the Diktat attack. But they'd had 3 months to think about that battle, and they'd spent that time getting very creative about personal combat techniques. The pirates surrendered after 15 minutes of trying to fight humans, who treated zero-gravity combat like a particularly energetic recreational activity. But the real surprise came after the fighting was over, when Lieutenant Commander Valeri, apparently now sporting the rank of commander and a collection of interesting scars, found me in the storage compartment where I'd been hiding. "Sorry we're late," she said, like she was apologizing for missing a dinner appointment. Traffic was murder coming through the hyperspace lanes. "How?" I managed to ask. "How did you get here so fast?" Valeri grinned. That manic human grin I come to know and dread. "Oh, that. Well, after the Diktat thing, we figured it would be a good idea to have some rapid response capability. So, we've been working on a few projects." A few projects. They'd spent 3 months secretly developing the ability to deploy military forces across interstellar distances in a matter of hours. And they called it a few projects. "The beacon you gave me," I said. How many people have them? Just you so far, she replied. But we're working on expanding the program. Turns out, there are quite a few folks out there who could use some backup when things go sideways. That's when I realized what the humans had done. They hadn't just built a defense network for their own colony. They created a rapid response system for anyone they considered worth protecting, anyone they considered family. The trip back to Beta Prime gave me time to think about everything that had happened. The humans had risked their lives to save me, not because of any diplomatic obligation or interspecies treaty, but because I'd stood with them during their own crisis. They'd remembered a favor, and they repaid it in the most human way possible, by completely redefining what was theoretically feasible. When we reached Beta Prime, found a colony that had been transformed. The mining operations were still there, but they'd been integrated into a defensive network that looked like something out of a military engineering textbook. The population had grown to nearly 5,000, mostly refugees from diktat attacks, who'd heard about the colony that had successfully fought off an invasion fleet. But the most significant change was in the orbital infrastructure. Beta Prime now boasted a shipyard that was busy turning out more of those improvised warships, and a communication array that could reach across half the galaxy in real time. Captain Kellen, now promoted to Admiral Kellen, because apparently saving your entire colony from annihilation gets you noticed by higher ups, met me at the spaceport. "Welcome back, Ambassador," she said. "I trust your rescue was satisfactory." "More than satisfactory," I replied. "Although I have to ask, how many people know about your rapid response capability?" "Officially, nobody. Unofficially," she shrugged in that casual, human way. "Word gets around. We've had quite a few requests for those emergency beacons lately, and you're just giving them out to the right people?" "Sure. Folks who've proven they're willing to stand up when it matters. Folks who understand that sometimes you have to fight for what's worth preserving." That evening at the celebration dinner, they insisted on throwing for my safe return. I sat surrounded by humans who treated my survival as a personal victory. They told stories about the rescue mission like it had been a fun weekend project, and they planned future improvements to their rapid response system with the same enthusiasm. Most species reserve for discussing the weather. Commander Valeri found me during the lull, when I was standing on the observation deck looking out at the shipyard, where more impossible vessels were taking shape. "Penny for your thoughts?" she said, which is apparently a human idiom that means something like, "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm trying to understand," I said. "This whole system you've built. The ships, the communication network, the response capability. It must have cost enormous resources. And you're using it to help people who can't offer you anything in return, can't they?" Valeri asked. "You helped us fight off the diktat. That doctor we pulled out of the Regalian system last month. She's working on new medical treatments for radiation exposure. The engineer we rescued from those slavers. He's designed improvements to our ship navigation systems. So, it's not altruism," I said. "It's an investment strategy." Valeri laughed, which made her facial scars bunch up in interesting ways. "Maybe. Or maybe we've just figured out that the galaxy is a dangerous place, and it's better to have friends who will watch your back than enemies who will stab it. And if someone can't contribute anything useful, then we help them anyway," she said, with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that makes humans simultaneously frustrating and admirable, because that's what you do for family. 6 months later, I submitted my final report on the Beta Prime mining rights negotiation to the Confederation Council. It was the longest diplomatic report in the organization's history, and it recommended immediate approval of all human requests, along with a formal alliance agreement and technology sharing protocols. The council approved the recommendations unanimously. They also offered me a promotion to senior ambassador and a permanent posting to coordinate human Confederation relations. I accepted, of course. Someone needs to keep an eye on the humans. And I've discovered that the job comes with some unexpected benefits. Like the emergency beacon that now sits in my desk drawer, ready to summon impossible rescue ships crewed by miners who think that physics is more of a suggestion than a law. Like the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, there are 3,000 humans who consider me family. And like the growing certainty that the next time someone threatens something the humans care about, they're going to discover that humanity doesn't just remember favors, they remember everything, and they repay it all, one impossible rescue at a time. Epilogue, the final entry in Ambassador Zyler's personal log, dated 3 years after the events at Beta Prime. The Human Colonial Defense Network now operates 47 rapid response vessels across 16 sectors. They've successfully completed over 200 rescue operations, defended dozens of colonies from various threats, and somehow managed to turn their entire expansion into one giant mutual aid society. The Diktat hegemony, incidentally, has stopped expanding into human-adjacent territories. Apparently, the prospect of fighting an enemy that treats military logistics as a creative challenge has dampened their enthusiasm for conquest. Last week, I received my 5th emergency beacon. This one is programmed to summon what humans call the Heavy Response Package. I'm told it involves ships with names like Regrettable Decision and Diplomatic Incident, which tells you everything you need to know about human naming conventions and tactical philosophy. I keep all 5 beacons in my office now, arranged on a shelf where visiting diplomats can see them. They serve as an excellent reminder that some species take friendship very, very seriously. And if anyone ever doubts the wisdom of treating humans as allies rather than enemies, I tell them about Beta Prime, about 3,000 colonists who looked at impossible odds and decided that impossible was just another word for we haven't figured out how yet. Because that's the thing about humans. They don't just remember favors. They remember everything, and they have very creative ideas about how to return the favor.